So in type designing, you have three basic lines. Bottom one is the baseline. The second one is the X height. And then the top one is the cap height. Whatever is above the X height is called, on lowercase letters, is called the ascenders, and whatever is below the baseline is called the descenders, and the opening in the letters is called apertures. Whenever you draw letters, you draw them on a canvas. They are just different colors for effect. They are called UPM or M size, or call them whatever. It's basically just a canvas, and you can draw, as you can see here, you can draw outside a canvas. That's a thing from the past when you had letterpress, or you still do, but where every metal type, sometimes you want them to overlap, so you need to be able to draw outside the canvas as well. Well, as designers and programmers, we call ourselves problem solvers. That's a cliche, but when you're designing a font, you want to solve many problems at a time. So you have to prioritize, what is most important for me, or for this font. So making a font for coding, you want it to be legible. That is, you want it to be easy to read. You want it to be compact, because we just love cramming as much code as possible into our screens. And, well, it's always nice to have something pretty to look at. And obviously, some changes you might make to make it more legible makes it less pretty or otherwise. And, well, for me at least, making a priority before beginning helps make consistent decisions. So this is another font. Anyone can recognize this font? No, it's Pragmata Pro. It's also a coding font. And it's one of the most compact fonts out there. So you can see, well, don't know if the designer thought that way when he designed it, but at least I like to think that he had compactness as his main priority. So, proportional fonts or monospace? That's a fairly religious question, I guess. I chose monospace, at least because I do a lot of SAS lists and other stuff where indentation really matters. So for that sake, I can't see myself using a proportional font for coding anytime soon. But if you're using some more verbose language or whatever, you could use it. The benefit being, you lose the whole vertical rhythm, but you can have it more compact because I and L's and whatever can be, and it's easier to read as well. But as said, I like things aligned, so I like more space. And actually, one note, the monospace refers to the UPM that we had earlier. They are all the same width. So that's the canvas that the letters are drawn on that are the same width. The actual letters can be varying with bitmap and outline fonts. Anyone here use bitmap fonts on their code? It's kind of old school thing to do. The benefit of bitmap fonts is, some do it for nostalgic reasons, but also habit. If you always use bitmap font, I guess I know quite a few people who use them, and it's also they are very crisp to look at on the screen, so you don't have the fuzziness that you sometimes have when you do an outline font or vector-based font. The benefit of doing something vector-based is obviously that you can scale it, and you don't have any jaggedness at any size. So what do you do when you design a font? Normally you draw a letter. This is the lowercase a. And then, I made a pretty A. But then you have to make it work at different font sizes. So you do some manual hinting in this case, which is basically just violating the shape to try to make it fit over a grid. So you can see the actual letters for the different sizes end up looking like this. This is especially important to do if you want to have something work on Windows which is notoriously bad at font rendering. But this is done manually, but you can also do it automatically with almost as good results. But obviously doing it manually gets better results. But it's very time consuming and expensive, so for an open source project, not really a viable solution. What I did instead was to, well, I mean, you doing coding, you have a preferred font size. So instead of starting drawing the letters, I figured, well, I like to draw at line height or code with a line height around 15 pixels. I find that to be pleasant to look at and without too much eye strain. So if I have to code all day, it's well, that's my size. So I draw the grid, and then instead of designing the letters first, I had the grid, and then looks like this. I drew the letters. I'll probably have this next slide. Yeah. So you can see here the grid, and then drew the letters to fit that grid initially. So instead of just drawing the letters from, oh, this looks great at donut size or whatever, trying to make it fit a grid from the beginning. This also meant that the lowercase s maybe looks a bit weird because I wanted to fit there, so I had to pull it up a bit. The blue and green blocks you see there are the auto hints that the font program creates. And what they tell the program or operationals, the system laws, is just that this is a vertical line, this is a horizontal line. So when you show me at smaller sizes, try to make this part fit and to make it sharp. So what I ended up with doing that is something almost bitmappy looking. Very sharp letters, well, that I find pleasant to use in coding, especially if you have a low resolution screen. I mean, if you're on a retina display, it's not that important. The one in the bottom is Roboto Mono. Okay, quiz again. Guess the font. It was released recently by a fairly big company. What? Bigger company? Bigger company? Yeah. So it's the San Francisco font used in the new OS 9 and El Capitan or El Capitan or whatever you call it. So what they did was say, okay, we make this font, but it has to work at different sizes and different places. So if you notice it, you can see that there are actually 4 different versions of the same letter. So they made a UI, I think they called it, for bigger sizes for phone and for OS X. This is the display font, and this is the text font, and then this is for the watch. So I think they call it Compact, San Francisco Compact, and then again for the title and for the text. And you can see the differences. Again, the aperture, they've increased that going from display to smaller sizes, and then going to even smaller sizes, you can notice how the letters are a bit narrower, with a straighter, less curvy side. So that's the same, well, I made a coding font, so it's meant to be used at small sizes. So when I designed it, and then it's always fun when Apple has done the same principles afterwards, but was to make it compact to work at small sizes. Some examples of fonts. So why big apertures? That last letter is it's actually a letter. I think it's called theta and used in whatever languages. But it shows you, the common shapes, shared shapes between the A, E, and S. So what really defines those letters, apart from the stem on the A, is the apertures. So when you have a font at real small sizes, you want them to be easy to tell apart, you make the apertures bigger. when you make a coding font, you want to make sure that, well, when you have a normal font, you can often tell the letters apart from context because they're written inside words or whatever. But when you do coding, it's not always words, it can be whatever. So it's critical to be able to tell each individual glyph apart. I mean, if you have a bug, it's annoying if that bug is a result from a typo somewhere that you can't spot because the glyphs look similar. So you want the glyphs to be very different. Again, it's Monoid on the top, Pragmata Pro previously mentioned, Fira, and Source Code Pro by Adobe, also an open source font. Often you see people mentioning, oh, it has a 2-story G, that means it's really legible and you can use it for UI. You can, but, well, since I've put it in there, it's to show that the 2-story lowercase g can actually sometimes look as a bit like an 8 or ampersand. So, well, anywho, I chose the single-story G. Yeah, and you may notice the dollar sign looks a bit weird, blown up on Monoid, but when you use it at small sizes, you want it to be able to tell it apart from S. You know, these two letters look too similar, in my opinion. But if you just do this at small sizes, it looks a bit fuzzy. So opening it up like that, this works. We're at 15 pixels, but not big like this. More letters to be able to 0. Some prefer dotted, some prefer slashed. Obviously, if you're Greek, you might prefer with the slash in because otherwise it looks like theta. And Danes, I think we're supposed to prefer the dotted ones because the other one looks like an O. But I prefer the slash one still. Also notice how breaking up a shape makes it stand out even more. So I opted to break the inner curve in the Q, so you can, well, it's more different from a big O than if I had only, I mean, if you hadn't done this but only done the hook below, they would be more similar. But by breaking the inner shape, the inner curve, they look, makes it stand out more. These letters are often confused as well. You often add slab serifs, are they called, to letters that are normally just a straight line to make them appear, so your words doesn't like fall apart. You want the letters to be when you have a monospaced font, you want them to be equally width. But, well, I've opted not to do so because I find at smaller sizes it's not that big an issue. Obviously, if you want to use it at bigger sizes, then it might be an issue. But I made this font specifically for coding, so it's only meant to be used at smaller font sizes. So the ascenders and descenders I talked about earlier. You often see people, this font has a tall X height, so it's great for, it's very legible. It's true to a certain point, because if you just increase the X height, which was this part, you end up having shorter ascenders and descenders, and then those letters will be harder to tell apart. Obviously, you can increase the ascenders and descenders with it, but then you just end up having less interline white space, and that's not good for legibility either. So it's a balance. So you can't just say, well, it has a tall X height, and that's great for legibility. The comma and the punctuation in general, you want to be able to tell that apart, so you exaggerate it a bit compared to when you do a normal font. And you may also have noticed by now how I've opted to the Y and the lowercase g and also the comma to elevate them slightly. And that's also to keep it as compact as possible. So if you have many lines of code and they're tightly spaced, you don't want the letters to overlap. So the letters that are curvy and have a hook below them, try to push them up a bit. And that also makes the comma less similar to the full stop. These, almost all monospaced fonts do these right, in my opinion, because they're so critical to get right. But if you compare them to a normal font, they would be less. They would be more similar. Operators. Again, Fira Mono, second bottom. That looks prettier at this size because then you don't need the operators to be that big. But when you're coding a small font size, you want to be able to tell a plus sign from a minus sign or whatever, so you don't do any errors. Anyone in here able to read these letters? They're Cyrillics.
A and Z.
Yeah?
Yeah. A and Z.
And the last one? There's a number.
There's a number.
3, yeah. I don't know how to say it. Anywho, there are letters in Russian and other languages that use Cyrillic script. And many fonts do it like this, and you can see obviously the last 2 letters look quite similar. And I've also done that on Monoid, but also added a second option to have a 3 that looks like this. So for people that write Cyrillics, you can opt to use that. Or in general, if you prefer a letter 3 that looks like this, you can choose that one instead. That's just to show that, I mean, often you think, oh, coding, that's just in English. And this is just a GitHub search showing that by searching on that's a fairly common Russian short word, because you can't just search a single letter on GitHub, so you have to write a word. And it gives you 789,000 something code results. So we as Westerners might think that, oh, it's just English, everything in the code, but it's not. Okay, so that's one of the beautiful things when you do open source project in GitHub. I drew these and then asked, okay, are they good, are they bad? I mean, I don't speak Russian, even less able to read it. So drawing it was a challenge. And then this guy jumps in and gives all of these examples, and he agreed with me that PT Sense or PT Mono, you may use that font before. It's a beautiful font, underused in my opinion, made by a Russian guy, so it's obviously good for Cyrillics. And then you chat back and forth, and then, well, you have these funky letters in Russian that are fairly wide, so how to fit those. So that this thing should actually be out here on this letter, but that would end up mixing or overlapping with the next letter, so how to solve that, and then it just goes, oh, okay, but according to this you have the bigrams, so it's, if you're decoding spying, you use bigrams to analyze languages. So this just tells you how often in Russian do you have these letter combinations. Okay, so it's almost never combined with a letter that is wide after it. You can see where we already had M, that's down there. So it's a fairly infrequent case scenario, so I could, with peace in mind, make the hook wider, so it would potentially overlap, but it would look better for Cyrillic. So that's one of the great things about doing stuff on GitHub and other places, because all sorts of people want to chime in and help. Metrics, why are they important? In general, when you increase line height, you increase readability to a certain point. I mean, if you spread the lines too far apart, then you lose the bodiness of text or the sense of things belonging together. But to a certain degree, it's true that whenever you increase line height, you increase legibility. And then if you decrease it, I mean, that's a personal preference. close you want your lines to be. This figure actually isn't mine. It's taken from the... Did anyone see the WWDC talk about fonts? You should, if you're interested in fonts. It's actually a good... I mean, it's Apple being Apple, so it's them showboating all sorts of features as if they were new. That has been an open type feature for the last 10 or 15 years, but it's actually a very good 15-minute or 30 minutes, I can't remember, video explaining a lot of basic typography concepts and how to use and think about typography when you're designing interfaces, and also for web. You can apply a lot of those concepts for web design as well, so it's a good video to watch. And this just to show that when you're doing small body text, you want to increase the tracking. And us front-end guys, we've been doing this for years. We got into the CSS and wrote layer spacing and then increased it, or at least we should have, because it really improves the readability of small sizes. And what Apple have done is just they built it into the operating system, so whenever you use the font, they automatically adjust it so that the letter spacing is optimized for whatever font size you're actually showing the font. So it's a feature that would be nice to have in the web design as well, because then you wouldn't have to do all sorts of media queries and say whenever this size and this size do this. It's really subtle. So I wrote this article on Medium a couple of days ago. The difference between the two screenshots is that on the... I can see it. Step back a bit. Yeah. On the left, I've turned off their letter spacing adjustments. So you can see that the headlines are... It's a bit looser spaced. And even more subtle, the body text is tighter. So what they do, and what most of us do when we design a web page, if we care about typography, is to increase the letter spacing at small sizes and to decrease it for headlines and big text. And obviously doing a coding font meant for small sizes meant that I opted for a fairly loose tracking. So it may look a bit weird blown up, but it works really well at small sizes. Version control. Everyone in here familiar with Git and GitHub? Nodding all around. No? No, yes. No, yes. Okay, anyone in here not familiar with Git and GitHub? That's okay. That's perfectly fine. One thing, version control, programmers are quite familiar with it. Designers, not so much, but they should be, because it's a really brilliant way to control it whenever you make changes, instead of having... So you see a lot of, probably got a file from a designer where you have PSD, new, whatever, and then you end up having 10 PSD files, which is basically the same files, but they made some small changes, and then they save it as a new PSD file. And what PSD files you use, when you do version control, you only have one file, and then whenever you make a change, you do it as a commit, and you write a comment to that commit, and so you can easily revert back. So it works really well in design as well. So whenever I made a change this morning, I wasn't satisfied with the letter 8, so I updated that, pushed it, and then in the comment wrote updated letter 8, and then if I have a change of heart in the next day or two, I can easily go back and revert that change. So that's basically version control. And Git is stored locally, but you can also sync it with GitHub. So you have a repository online where you have your Git. Benefit of GitHub being, obviously it's free, that's good. Serves as an automatic backup. I mean, if you only have it locally, as soon as you sync to GitHub, you have an automatic backup of your project. So you have issues, as I showed before. It can be used for bugs, used for feature requests. It can also be used to, the classical feature requests. And +1, this feature. Oh, this would be awesome. OMG. I hate those because that's nonsense. I mean, write those elsewhere. Issues are for, you have to contribute somehow when you make a comment on an issue, in my opinion at least. But they can get a bit drowning in all sorts of teenage people saying, oh, I want this, and even if the developer or whatever has written, oh, okay, this will happen, and you still see 20, oh, +1 awesome comments. Sorry, pet peeve of mine. GitHub also serves as a web host. I've used this as a web host for this. GitHub makes it easy for other people to contribute. And it also, if you have a project, I mean, if you only put it up on your personal web page, chances are other people can see it wouldn't be that big, but if you put it on GitHub, I mean, whenever people are searching for the keywords or whatnot, it makes it easy for them to discover, and they can also see your code, entire code base, before determining, okay, is this something I want to download or contribute to, or does this look worthwhile? When you're developing fonts, you can... Okay, so we've used the PSD analogy again. Is you have a big graphic image and everything is crammed down into one file. That's really not good if you want to do version controlling. It's much better to have it spread out in separate files so that each glyph, in this case being a font, is stored in the separate files. And FontForge, the open source program, has a SFDIR format, or otherwise there's a UFO format for fonts. That is, it's great to use because every glyph is saved, and all the text inside the code is human readable. So whenever you push something to GitHub, or so you can actually see the change. This is not me actually, it was Chase, and he's sick, so he was supposed to talk, so I'll try to explain what we've done, but it's actually, well, it's his work, so I only know so much. But if you have any questions, I know he would like to answer them on Twitter. I'll try to answer them as well. So building fonts, maybe a bit odd use for continuous integration deployment. So there are different companies that have web services that lets you do that. So when we started doing it, basically Chase had to, they emailed Chase and like, what are you trying to do? Because it was a new use case for them, so we had to explain them what we wanted to do. And initially, I think everyone tried using Worker. No. Anyway, we didn't use it, so I won't talk too much about that because it didn't work on with the collaboration and stuff. Couldn't make it work. So instead, we used CircleCI. Anyone use that? Yeah. So what it is, and please correct me if I'm wrong. So you get a computer slot online, and basically you inside your GitHub repo, you add a file and instructions to the CircleCI. So whenever you can make CircleCI do things whenever you push automatically. So and FontForge, the font editor, is scriptable using Python. So we made a font builder script, or chased it in Python, that it gets executed every time we push to GitHub using CircleCI. And what we can do with that font builder script is, this is what I edit. I haven't really done anything in the font builder script. You can see, so I wanted to be able to do different tracking because some people like it wider or looser, and then also some people want different line heights. So I wanted to be able to, and also for many of the letters, to add different options for people to download. Having to make all those and update those manually every time would be a pain. So using CircleCI to build FontForge scripting, everything gets done automatically. So for the actual website, also using GitHub. Again, fast, free, stable, especially when they aren't attacked from whatever's de facto dictatorship that are angry at them because they are hosting stuff that can be used to undermine their dictatorship. China was the recent one, was it in April or something, did a major DDoS attack on GitHub because there are a couple of projects hosted on GitHub that enables Chinese people to read a version of, I think it was The Guardian, and also to bypass the Great Firewall somehow. So China decided to do a major attack on GitHub. So it was a bit unstable for a couple of days, but in general, it's a very stable and reliable service. You can use Jekyll if you want to do a blog CMS kind of thing, crazy fast. I haven't used it for this because it's just a single page, web page, but yeah. And then you get all the GitHub goodness of version controlling. So when you make a change to a web page and you break something and you know, fuck, what did I do? It's very easy to revert that change and start over again. And also it makes it really easy for people to contribute. So I made a typo, I did something wrong. Random guy walks in, notices it, forks my project, makes the change, sends me a pull request, and then my page is updated. So for open source projects, it's really great to host your web pages on GitHub because it makes it that easy for other people to contribute as well. Thing to note is when you host a web page on GitHub Pages with a custom root domain, you get a lot of 302 redirects. So it gets really slow. I think it's up to 3 or 4 seconds to the first byte, and you don't want that. What you then do is you add Cloudflare to the mix, and they do all sorts of magic that some of you guys can probably explain better than me. But basically, you let them host your name servers, and also it lets you do all sorts of caching and minimizing and stuff that you wouldn't be able to do just using GitHub Pages. So that combination is brilliant. And we use raw Git so GitHub has a policy against hosting binaries that you distribute. You can do that, but then you have to use the releases. We have releases, but we don't use releases. It's a releases branch, so we're just hosting them within the repo. So we could potentially get blacklisted for distributing prepackaged binaries on the repository. So, but using raw Git is just a mirror max CDN as well of whatever you have on your GitHub repository. So you can use that to serve the actual files when people want to download. Okay, so we talked about a bit browser compatibility in terms of IE. In terms of typography, Safari is actually the main problem here because they don't support font feature settings. Have anyone here tried using font feature settings in their CSS? No. It should be. No, it shouldn't be because they don't work in Safari. But when they do, hopefully soon, it's really brilliant. It lets you do all sorts of things that if you've worked in InDesign or other places, you know how to make fractions, to have localized versions. So that letter 3 that I showed you could be automatically written with more set-inspired versions if I were to have a website in Russian. And you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But you can't really do it yet because Safari is not supported. And these are the stats from Denmark, so it's obviously less worse on a global stage, but for Danish users, it's almost 25% of the users. What I've done, this being just a hobby project, and also people wanting to download a monospaced fonts, they know how to change the browser. So I've just written change the browser. Same with JavaScript, because I use JavaScript for updating the CSS and stuff. Freaky future. This is not so freaky. This is just adding basic options. Bold, haven't made that yet because you just make the black ones and then you say bold is 50% black and 50% regular, and the font program generates itself. Retina. Fairly certain my next computer will have Retina display once this old fella dies. What you get from so this was how the grid looked for a normal font, but obviously if you go Retina you get a higher resolution on your grid. So this enables you to say this is the regular version, but this is actually preferable, but I couldn't do that on the regular version because I wanted the grid fit. But then on Retina you can shift it half a pixel and then it would still remain crazy crisp, but better looking.